This doesn't belong here.
What if the most unified people on Earth were never truly one? More than 1 billion faces. One name, Han. Same language. Same history. Same ancestral pride. But buried beneath that unity is a secret the mirror can't show you. Because when scientists cracked open the Han genome, they didn't find purity. They found a fracture. Not a scar from war. Not a split in belief. But a deep, quiet divide hidden in the blood. From the snow-brushed north to the jungle-lined south, the genes begin to shift, softly, subtly, like a ghost moving through time. You can't see it, but it's there. A north-south gradient, so invisible to the eye, yet so loud in the DNA. And this is just the beginning, because the Han were never a single people to begin with. They were forged, not born. Their identity, a political sculpture carved from tribes, clans, and vanished nations. Enemies absorbed, cultures erased, dialects silenced beneath a single name. And yet, the DNA remembers. It remembers the ones who built rice terraces in the south, and the ones who hunted deer in the north. It remembers fathers who marched from the Yellow River, and mothers whose names were never written down. So the next time you look in the mirror and feel something ancient staring back, know this: the face you wear may be Han, but the blood comes from strangers, survivors, and forgotten stories. To understand this paradox, this beautiful lie wrapped in genetic truth, we have to go back to the dust of the Central Plain, where the legend of unity began, and where the truth was buried alive. The myth says they came from one place, one tribe, one ancient flame. But what if the birthplace of the Han was already a battlefield of bloodlines? We journey now to the Central Plain, China's sacred heart, the Yellow Earth, cradle of emperors, birthplace of the Huaxia. This is where the legend begins, where history claims the Han emerged, proud, pure, and destined to rule. But the soil tells a different story. Beneath the ruins of old dynasties, deep in Hungbei's yellow dust, archaeologists found the bones. Ancient, still, waiting. 3,000 years buried, yet their DNA speaks louder than myth. And what it reveals is not unity, not purity, but fusion. These early Huaxia were not one tribe, they were many. Farmers from the north, traders from the west, strangers from the riverbanks and hills. Their genes already tangled, their blood already blended. Even then, before dynasties, before borders, the so-called Han were a mosaic, a story stitched together by war, migration, and survival. And yet something held, because when scientists compared those ancient skeletons to the genomes of modern northern Han, the match was uncanny. Thousands of years, countless wars, empires rising, collapsing, rebuilding, but still the core endured. It's as if the Central Plain encoded not just history, but memory. The bones remember who they were and who they became. But here's the twist. Not everyone stayed. Not all who carried this ancient fire stayed rooted in the Yellow Earth. Some moved south, into jungles, mountains, lands unknown. And as they went, they didn't just carry the past. They rewrote it. Because what happened next wasn't just migration. It was transformation. A genetic metamorphosis waiting in the shadows. And it begins the moment they leave the north behind. They left the Yellow Earth, carrying fire in their blood and empire in their breath. What began as a migration became something far stranger. A transformation. The Han didn't just move south, they spilled into it. Into lands older than their legends. Into forests that spoke languages their armies didn't understand. And they didn't come alone. They came with iron, with millet, with the script of the north carved into bamboo and bone. But what they brought in conquest, they lost in intimacy. Because the deeper they went, into the jungles, into the hills, into the river valleys, something unexpected happened. They changed. They met the Baiwe, fierce, free, and ancient. They crossed paths with Austroasiatic voices, Hmong spirits, Daik tongues humming through mountain wind. And slowly, piece by piece, the Han became something else. Not through war, through marriage. Archaeologists may uncover tools, weapons, walls. But the DNA tells the real story. Han men, soldiers, settlers, scribes, carried their Y chromosome south. But the women were already there. And it was their genes, their mitochondria, that slipped silently into the next generation. This was not just colonization. It was absorption. Rice fields bloom where bloodlines crossed. Languages bent to fit new tongues. And through it all, the genome shifted, not erased, but rewritten. Even today, Southern dialects dance differently. Foods taste older. Faces echo other stories. Look closely at a Southern Han family line, and you'll see it. The father's line, long, northern, imperial. The mother's, local, ancient, indigenous. The empire took the land, but the land left its mark on the empire. And as the South transformed, soaked in this cultural and genetic fusion, the North was changing too. But in silence, in shadow, a different kind of mixing, a different kind of memory. And it begins not in rice fields, but on the windswept edge of the steppes. While the South was fusing in rice and rain, the North held its silence, but not stillness. Because here, in the windswept bones of Hungbei, something older was stirring. You see, the Northern Han didn't just inherit the legacy of the Central Plain. They inherited something wilder, something harder to trace. The genomes match, yes. Ancient Hungbei skeletons still echo in modern Northern Han. But look closer, and the story changes. Threaded through those familiar genes are whispers from somewhere else. From the steppes, from the high, cold lands where no walls were high enough to hold the wind. Altaic blood, Yakut shadows, tribes with no temples, no scrolls, just horses, fire, and sky. And somehow they're here. Still here. Woven into the genetic code of northern cities. The contradiction is hard to ignore. Confucian discipline, order, family, tradition, built on the bones of nomadic chaos. The scholars in Beijing carry DNA from writers who once threatened their ancestors. But the records won't say that. The archives speak of culture, honor, harmony. The blood says conquest, intermarriage, memory that wasn't meant to survive. And yet it did. Modern Liaoning Han still carry haplogroup traces from those forgotten tribes. It's in the cells. It's in the silence between dynasties. But there's something else. Because this wasn't just cultural mixing. It wasn't just migration. This was adaptation. The North was colder, harsher, leaner. And the human body began to listen. Because when you can't outlast the land, you become part of it. And from this moment on, nature itself began to write its edits into the Han genome. The blood had been mixed. But now the land began to speak. Because genes don't just carry memory, they carry survival. And in the vast expanse of China, from frostbitten plains to humid jungles, the environment became a silent author. One mutation at a time. In the north, where wind cuts through bone and crops cling to dry soil, certain genes began to rise. Genes that could store fat better, burn energy slower, endure. In the south, where the sun pressed heavier on skin and food was richer, wetter, more fermented, different genes took hold. This wasn't culture adapting. This was biology rewriting the rules. And it didn't stop at metabolism. Ultraviolet light, pathogens, parasites, every element became a sculptor. ADH1B, the alcohol processing gene, became a marker of who could digest rice wine and who couldn't. Fads too shaped how bodies used fat. One version for northern wheat, another for southern oil. Even the way skin healed, faster, thicker, more vascular, evolved differently across this single ethnic group. But there's a darker thread in this evolution, because sometimes the same genes that help us hurt us. Variants linked to immune defense, inflammation, tissue repair, all selected for survival, also bring higher risks of schizophrenia, diabetes, heart disease. It's the hitchhiker effect, where a useful trait drags a dangerous one along behind it. And so, inside the Han genome, inside its brilliance and its resilience, are ghosts. Ghosts of plague survived. Famines endured. Wars outlived. The genome became a scroll, not clean, not smooth, but scratched and weathered by storm and sunlight. But not all evolution is silent, because while nature was shaping their bones and blood, a deeper divide was quietly forming, not in climate, not in genes, but in something far more personal, between mothers and fathers, The land carved the genes, but the bloodlines were carved by people. And in that blood, there's a secret, not of what changed over time, but of who passed it on. When scientists trace the Y chromosome, the father's line, a single signal rises, loud and clear. Oh, M122. It's everywhere, from ancient tombs to modern towns. North to south, west to east, the pattern is unmistakable. A father's legacy, repeated, stamped, standardized. It tells a story not of families, but of empire, because those men were settlers, officials, soldiers, sent to spread order, carry law, build outposts, and raise sons. But where did the daughters come from? That's where the story fractures. Because when we follow the mother's line, the mitochondrial DNA, the silence breaks. It's not uniform. It's a chorus. A scattering of roots, languages, forgotten names. Especially in the South. Here, the empty DNA maps out a very different tale. Of indigenous women, local tribes, older blood. Their faces don't show up in history books. But their genes, they're everywhere. And suddenly, the empire becomes personal. Imagine a man from the north, a Han soldier, fresh from the central plain, iron in hand, order in his eyes. And a woman from the south, Baiwe, barefoot in the rice fields, voice full of songs her people never wrote down. No treaty signed, but a child is born. That child becomes Han. And that story, repeated 1,000 times, in 1,000 different places, is the Han. Sex-biased inheritance, they call it. But it's more than that. It's a map. A record of power, of love, of surrender. Told not through borders, but through chromosomes. And that's the paradox. So many mothers, so many fathers from different worlds, different wars. And yet, we gave them one name, one label, one identity. Han. But if the pieces were this scattered, what held them together? What made them believe they were one? That answer is hiding in plain sight. We gave them one name, Han. But the genes tell a different story. Because when scientists ran the data, mapped every chromosome, every variation, they expected uniformity. One people, one profile. What they found shattered the illusion. It wasn't a tight circle. It was a spectrum, a genetic gradient from north to south, wide, deep, undeniable. Faces may look alike, but under the skin, it's a different map entirely. Principal component analysis, PCA, doesn't lie. It shows what history tried to smooth over. Not provinces, not borders, but rivers. The Yellow, the Yangtze, the Pearl, each carving their own genetic world. More than dialects, more than diet, the genome remembers geography. And in that forgetting, in that silence, there's been a price. Because when modern science treats all Han as the same, diseases get misdiagnosed. Drugs misfire. Lives are lost. All because of a myth we love too much to question. The myth of one people, indivisible. But the body doesn't lie. Take two strangers, born in the same country, speak the same tongue, share the same surname. Their DNA might be farther apart than a German and a Spaniard. This isn't just about ancestry. It's about precision, medicine, truth. Because while the empire was building temples and unifying scripts, its own people, quietly, beautifully, stayed genetically diverse. And the moment you realize that, you have to ask, if even within the Han, there were invisible divisions, what happens when something truly foreign slips in? What happens when genes arrive from beyond the empire's edge? They thought the empire was sealed, borders drawn, culture unified, DNA untouched. But the genes say otherwise. Because even in the north, where the Han bloodline was thought to be purest, most ancient, a faint signal glows. A whisper, a trace. Western Eurasian ancestry, 1 to 3%. Small enough to overlook, too strange to ignore. And it points west, not to war, but to something softer, slower. Trade, contact, movement. The Silk Road didn't just carry silk. It carried stories, desires, people. In the Tang dynasty, merchants from Persia, Sogdiana, even Rome, walked through Chinese cities like guests in a forgotten dream. Some traded goods. Others stayed, intermarried, left children behind. And those children, now part of the Han, carried a sliver of that other world, a tiny fold in their DNA, passed silently through generations. You won't see it in their names, but you'll find it in their genomes, like a postcard from a place they never visited, but still remember. But not all borderlands tell the same story. In Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, living beside the Han, show far deeper Western ancestry, nearly half. In Tibet, the genes drift in another direction entirely, shaped by altitude, isolation, survival. Same landscape, different history. And it's here we see the truth. Some genomes are ports, open, exchanged, layered with travelers and time. Others are fortresses, guarded, unchanged. The Han were both. And the fact that Western genes touched the heart of the empire, even lightly, proves one thing. No culture is ever truly sealed. But if the Silk Road brought whispers from the West, the loudest echoes came from much closer, because even more revealing than foreign merchants were the cousins next door. The Silk Road brought whispers from the West, but the loudest echoes came from next door, because when scientists looked east, to Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, they saw something strange. The Han didn't stand apart. They stood surrounded, mirrored. Koreans, genetically speaking, sit just one step away, almost siblings. But shift your gaze to Japan, and the picture begins to blur. Japanese DNA carries an older ghost. The Jaman, hunter-gatherers who walked the islands before rice ever touched the soil. That ghost split the line. Koreans leaned closer to the Han. The Japanese drifted slightly left. But here's where it gets more twisted. The Han, especially in the south, changed too. They didn't stay in the center of the web. They tilted. They absorbed more from Southeast Asia, more from indigenous bloodlines, more from rice and heat and time. And that tilt shows up everywhere. In skin, in hair, in bone. Take the EDR gene, a single mutation that thickens hair, shapes teeth, builds sweat glands. In Han Chinese, it's nearly universal. In Japanese, less so. In Southeast Asians, mixed and varied. Same with MTHFR, a gene shaped by folate, by UV light, by soil. It flows differently, depending on where your ancestors stood under the sun. These aren't just traits. They're time capsules. They show us who moved, who stayed, who changed. And yet, none of them draw a clean line. Because even when the genes diverge, the stories overlap. They tell of trade, of shared plagues, of languages that once borrowed from the same mother tongue. It's a mirror maze, faces that look the same, genomes that quietly disagree. So we ask again, what does it mean to be Han? If the genes are shared, if the mutations are mixed, if the neighbors are cousins in disguise, then maybe the answer was never in the blood. Maybe it lives somewhere else entirely. Maybe the answer was never in the blood, because for all the diversity, the splits, the migrations, the buried tribes and borrowed genes, something still held. A story, not written in chromosomes, but in culture. Something powerful enough to bind people who never shared the same ancestors, who didn't eat the same food, or speak the same dialect, or pray to the same gods. Han, the name that pulled it all together. It wasn't just an ethnicity. It was an idea. One language, reshaped through time. One script, etched on bone, now typed on glass. One history, edited, rewritten, retold, until it fit everyone who carried the name. Conquered or conqueror, northern farmer, southern child. You could carry DNA from a steppe warrior or from a jungle tribe. But if you spoke the words, wore the customs, bowed at the right shrines, you were Han. It wasn't purity. It was absorption. A culture so massive, so flexible, so enduring. It didn't erase differences. It consumed them. A farmer in Yunnan, a banker in Beijing. They may share nothing in their genome, but in the eyes of the empire, they are one. This is not contradiction. It's coevolution. A culture that moved faster than biology and shaped the way people saw themselves before they ever knew what lived in their cells. That's the true power of identity. It doesn't just reflect what you are. Sometimes it tells you what to become. But what happens when that identity leaves the land that built it? When Han blood sails across oceans, into cities that don't speak its name, into genes that don't share its history. In the next episode, we follow the diaspora and what happens when Han DNA becomes a global citizen.